Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Katelyn Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today you'll meet Kay Isbell. Kay is a sixth-generation farmer and entrepreneur from Northern California. Kay grew up deeply rooted in agriculture with childhood memories that include learning to drive a pickup truck at just the age of 4 years old. Today, she and her family are building a farm of their own, raising low-line Angus cattle and goats, and selling their products directly to consumers. In our conversation, Kay shares what it's been like to build a business from scratch, the challenges of farming and educating consumers, and the cultural connections and barriers she's experienced in selling goat meat. She also opens up about the environmental realities of farming and the importance of mentorship, and her hopes to see their ranch thrive for future generations to come. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Kay. Welcome, Kay, to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I am really excited to dive into your story and learn all about your farm and your agricultural roots in your area. So tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
My start in agriculture was a deep one. My family had immigrated to this area, which is in Northern California, just over the Oregon border. I'm sixth generation on the same piece of land. Well, my family still lives on the same piece of land. My husband and I bought our own piece of property and started our own farm about 6 years ago. My family was a commercial cattle operation, raised cow-calf. My husband and I knew that we weren't going to be able to afford such a big piece of property to run such a large herd, so we've started a direct-to-consumer business with low-line Angus or Aberdeen Angus, and then we also have some goats, too, that we sell direct-to-consumer.
Can you tell us anything you know about the 5 generations before you in the area that you live?
Yes. My family came over from Germany and went through Ellis Island, and then they settled here. They started off just homesteading with a few cows, clearing the land because some of it had some trees on it, and creating pastures and hay barns and that kind of stuff. They also were gold miners and mined for a little gold because our area is rich in gold. And then as the generations, my grandfather went to Stanford and got his engineering degree and worked as a civil engineer until after World War II. And then he came back to Siskiyou County and started farming part-time. He unfortunately had testicular cancer and had to go back to being an engineer, and built a lot of the major highways here in our area, or helped design the major highways in our area. And then my father and my uncle took over the ranch just about the time, or just before I was born, and they still ranch today.
That is very deep history. The roads that you drive on, designed by your grandfather. That's amazing. Tell us some of your favorite childhood memories growing up on the ranch.
Learning to drive the pickup and driving the feed truck for my dad when I was just 4 years old, and, learning to drive tractor. We had an old Johnny Putt-Putt tractor that my sister and I weren't tall enough to operate both pedals on both sides of the tractor. So I would sit on one side and operate the clutch, and she would operate the brake, and the gas pedal was a hand gas pedal, or a hand throttle. And we would rake all the hay, bouncing along and singing songs. And because there was no radios, and it was long before cell phones and iPods and everything. So we would sing to ourselves and bounce down the field.
That's amazing. I didn't grow up in farming. I grew up in the city, and I came here later in life. And it's funny to me that, we talk about technology and things that have advanced. Hearing that story about that tractor, I myself, at this point in my life, would have absolutely no idea how to operate that piece of machinery. However, the giant combine or the brand new tractor with the GPS, you just hit the button, all of those things, I can figure those things out. But
right?
The multi-pedal thing is always, what is it, like millennial, like theft prevention? Because
yeah, technically I'm a millennial, but I don't feel like I qualify as a millennial. I'm right on the cusp of being a millennial and a Gen X, and I feel like I go back instead of forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think automatically, when you're a farm kid and doing things outside on the farm, it really just like negates all of the stereotypical millennial things that some of us grew up with.
Yeah.
So did you leave the ranch and pursue a career off of the ranch, or how did you end up where you are today?
I went to college and got a bachelor's degree in animal science, and then I worked part-time to full-time as a veterinary technician. My husband got his master's degree, and while he was doing that, we lived some other places, and then had kids, stayed home with them pretty much, worked part-time, and then we finally got enough accumulated that we could buy a piece of property. And then I also teach now high school science.
That's great. So tell us about finding your property. We were kind of laughing before about people getting into agriculture, and essentially you and your husband were getting into the business yourselves. What was it like trying to find property that would fit what you envisioned your business would look like?
My mom is a real estate agent, and she said, maybe you should just try writing a letter to these people, because it was a piece of property that had most of what we wanted. It was pretty dilapidated and run down, and so they weren't looking to sell it. So we wrote them a letter, and they decided that they'd want to sell it. And then we're able to get a USDA loan, which is a really long and complicated process, and it takes about 6 months. And thankfully, the people that we're going to buy the property from weren't in that big of a hurry, because it wasn't on the market, and they just decided that they would take the money now and sell it to us. So it took about 6 months to get all the USDA loan paperwork approved and buy it. But it had all the things we were looking for, and it was just kind of, well, if it works out, it works out. If it doesn't, then we'll have to keep looking.
I have heard the letter writing success stories, and I'm always amazed. Do you remember what was in that letter?
No, I don't. I don't remember what we asked. I think we were just saying that we were interested in it. It was if they would be interested in selling. I don't think we gave too much personal information on that one.
Well, and the thing is, you never know, right? With succession planning, if there are children to take over that piece of property or not. And I guess the worst they can say is no.
Right.
Right? I guess that could be advice that people say. I heard this on a podcast that if we just write letters to
the
people.
right letters. Yeah. The owners were absentee owners, and they actually had renters in the house that we live in, and the renters hadn't paid rent for 16 years. So that kind of helped motivate the process. They weren't going to get the renters out at this point. They were basically just sitting there.
Right.
And so in order to evict them, they were going to have a change of ownership or something pretty drastic.
Well, you came at the right time, I guess,
Yes.
when they were just tired enough 16 years in of not getting a rent payment.
Yeah.
So talk to me about growing your operation from scratch.
It has been a slow process. We started out with about 10 cows, and we only have 25 now. We don't have very many, which is that's the average herd size of the US, honestly, but it still seems like a very small amount of animals, because I grew up on a ranch where we were running 300 when I was young and up to 600 now head of cattle. So that's, in comparison, it seems very small. And then we decided to add goats, because goat meat is one of the biggest red meats consumed in the world. And that has been a very big learning experience. Goats are not easy. They get out a lot. They are very susceptible to tetanus, which I did not know. And we have lost a few because of it. And we have a weed that they really like and they really consume well. But it ties up the iodine in the mothers when the babies are in the womb. And I lost a bunch of my babies the first year to goiters. So it's just learning. It's been a big learning process on goats.
Right. Coming from the city, I have had both goats, and I had a beef cow one time that I just thought I would pick up at the auction while I was there. Much to my husband's dismay. But yeah, the challenges, and especially when you're bringing in a new breed of anything or a new animal, it's challenging to learn those things. Tell us how you started with the direct to consumer for your products.
I was kind of like everybody else. Well, we bought our piece of property in 2017. So 2018, 19, we were just, having our first set of calves. They were about ready to go to market just before COVID, or just right around COVID. And it was like, well, if you're going to do something, that's when the direct to consumer sales were really taking off. There is a woman that is very successful at direct to consumer sales in our area, and she was doing some educational courses at the time about how to do it. And so I took that opportunity to learn. And so we do both. We sell whole animals or halves or quarters to people. And we also do by the package, just kind of depending. And I tried to do kind of regionally at first. And I found that I actually prefer not to have to ship meat. It's too complicated, and working with dry ice and being in a rural community, it's over an hour and a half to pick up your shipment of dry ice. And then it's an hour or a hour round trip to get it to a UPS facility or a FedEx facility to get it shipped. And then depending on, FedEx goes one direction, they go north, and UPS goes south. And so it's like you have to use both, and it's not streamlined. And I found that it was a little more complicated than I wanted to deal with. So we really have focused on just building our customer base in our local community.
Would you say that the interest in the direct-to-consumer meat has, response from consumers, has it stayed the same since COVID, or has it gone up, or has it gone down? What's been your experience?
I feel like it's gone down. I feel like there's trying to meet your customer, making it convenient and removing the barriers so the customer can get it as quickly as possible is the hardest part. They want the convenience. They're already at the grocery store, so they're going to want the convenience of going to pick up the meat, their dinner, all in one spot, and not having to go make a connection to somebody else some other time.
Absolutely. You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman Podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast. We've talked about some of the challenges of this, of, being rural and things being an hour and a half plus away, not being convenient. What have been some of the other challenges that you've faced in growing this part of your business?
Just mainly marketing. Marketing's probably the hardest thing for me. Coming up with the words to say and having a hard time posting on social media. You don't want to share your whole entire life, but then building customer base and building relationships, I think, is probably the most challenging part for me.
Yeah, I like that you said that. And I think it's something that folks in agriculture do struggle with, is what is the way that we are marketing? And, the traditional way of marketing through a newspaper or the community flyer, those are still things in local communities. If you are able to ship, then obviously getting it out to a wider audience. But I like what you said about not knowing how much is too much to share, or feeling like it is too much to share, as you're talking to me on a podcast where we're talking all about you. So I'm proud of you for doing this, because it is hard to talk about yourself. And I find it tough to talk about products that are coming from our farm versus a neighbor's farm. Why would you buy ours versus the neighbor's without marketing it like a used car salesman, it being really icky? What resources have you found that have been helpful in teaching you basically how to market your products?
As I said, there's a woman that does lots here, and she really has grown a very large business. And so just kind of either taking some of her classes and resources that she gives, or just, following along and learning and just paying attention to what they're doing. I would say following, just in general, lots of people that are doing direct to consumer and figuring out if that works for you or doesn't work for you, and just kind of learning from them is probably the best way that I have found to learn. And then the local economic development council always does lots of classes and has lots of resources.
Yeah. What is the market for goat meat in your area? I'm always curious to know.
It wasn't as strong as I was hoping. I think because there is barriers that culturally that I just don't meet the right people. I have a customer who, the first time I met him, he started bargaining with me, and I'm like, I get that's your culture, it's not mine. And so it was a little bit like, oh wait, I gotta meet him where he's at. And he's become a good customer, and he's kind of, I guess we've decided on a price that's good, because he doesn't bargain nearly as much as he used to.
I love that you said this. It's something that I guess I didn't realize when I got into goats. My husband told me if I was going to have an animal on the farm that wasn't like a cat or a dog, even the cats and dogs are supposed to have a purpose, but they're really just for me. I had to have livestock that had a purpose. So when I was thinking about what I wanted, I was like, well, of course I want goats, because who wouldn't want a goat?
Right.
Yeah, not realizing the whole good fence, good goat thing. And always such a pain in the butt. But even learning, where to market them when they are ready, either to go to a new home or for consumption, the cultural differences of buying, let's say, a half a cow versus somebody saying, I would like to buy this whole goat, and I would like to slaughter it myself, and I would like to do it on your property, or any of those things. There's so many barriers depending on where you live. But also I was like, I'm sorry, I'm too soft-hearted for you to ever do that in my backyard.
Yes.
It's just so different. Talk about kind of the culture in your area when it comes to direct to market products. Is that something that was happening in your area before, or is this something that is relatively newer since COVID times?
It's relatively newer since COVID times. Most of the cattle ranches are large enough that it would be a side job or a side avenue to market. They're not going to get out to being selling 600 cows or calves a year to direct to consumer. That would take a lot of marketing and building channels and stuff. So most of them are still going to be very traditional. So it's either the younger generation, the third generation. I wouldn't say we're necessarily the younger generation anymore, but the kids coming back that are wanting to have their own piece and just doing a few at a time.
For sure. How have you involved your family in your operation?
Well, my parents are completely separately. They do their own thing. My two children, I try to encourage them to help and be a part of it when they want to be, but I don't make them necessarily. They like to drive tractors. The oldest one likes to drive tractors, and he's more than happy to help with any haying or farming that we're doing. And the youngest one likes to chase cows and work with the animals. He really likes to go with my uncle and chase cows out to the mountains. So they have a summer range, and we horseback chase the cows up into the high mountain country for the summer, and he loves that, and that's what he does.
That's awesome. What challenges do you face in your area when it comes to environmental elements for your year of farming and calving and all of the things?
Our biggest challenge is water rights. We get our water from snowpack, and we're pretty consistent. We do have droughts. 2020, 2021 were very super dry. We didn't get a lot of snowpack. But the state of California in general either has really dry periods where we go, anywhere from 6 months to a year with very little water, to very wet periods where we're having flooding. So since 2021, we've had lots of water, and we've been perfectly safe with our water. But the state has regulated us and asked us to reduce our water consumption by 30%, which is definitely a challenge when you're relying on irrigation and using the water that is stored naturally by snowpack.
Yeah, you're talking to a farmer who has never farmed a year without a drought since I started farming here on the farm. Yeah. But it's you're dealing with environmental issues, right? That we have no control over, on top of other issues that it can feel like we have no control over as well.
And the rest of the country and the rest of it has a very different precipitation than we do. We don't get precipitation in the summer. We may get a thunderstorm here and there, but they're not significant. They're like a half inch of rain or something. That, like, they wet the ground, but they're not where we get our water supply. And I know most of the rest of the United States and England, Canada gets consistent rainstorms, and that's where you get most of your water. So during our growing season, we don't get any rain, hardly. It's all groundwater. So it's totally different. We can go 6 months without rain, and our vegetation that's natural to our area is fine. And where I know in other parts of the country, they're like, oh, it hasn't rained in 2 weeks. We're like, we might go 6 months without rain. So it's a totally different experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to a question about folks being disconnected from their food. How do you educate consumers and customers on, where their food comes from, why it costs as much as it does, and the barriers that come with getting food to their plate that maybe they're unaware of?
I think that is a big challenge that we have as agriculture producers, is to educate. Because I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about, this guy was saying that you couldn't eat an apple because hadn't been processed. And so you're just like, it wasn't from the store, so you couldn't just pick the apple off the tree and eat it. And so it was that's where the joy of social media does come in, because you can have those conversations with people that are outside of your circle of influence. Me selling locally in our community, where we are a rural community, so my consumers literally are seeing us do our work every day because they're driving by our fields. Our kids are friends, their kids are coming over and playing with other farm kids and learning about what's going on and stuff. So I don't necessarily focus on the education portion to the masses.
Yeah, I think, and that's, to me, that's okay. I, as a farmer, am still learning about how food is made, essentially, or grown, and different ways of doing it, right? And I think, anybody putting their story out there of what they're doing or how they're doing it, and being able to explain this is why we do it to folks who are curious, I think is important. And sharing bits of your story in your communities or online or through a podcast or whatever, I think is adding to the greater purpose of people being reconnected to their food.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. The more connections you can make, and your circle of friends, like I went to college in a completely different area, and so I've made friends from there, and then they'll comment and post on something that I said, and that increases our circle of influence, definitely.
Absolutely. What are your hopes for the future of your ranch and your direct to consumer?
My ultimate goal is for my property to be able to stay in agriculture production for many, many generations. And so if my children personally don't want to come back, which I think they do, but if they don't, then I am going to leave it to somebody else that does. That's something I feel strongly about, that we should be able to keep our spaces open and keep our properties into agriculture production for as long as possible. For my direct to consumer, I'm hoping that I can just continue. I don't really see, we have reached our limit of capacity, and I would just hope to continue to maintain and not looking to grow it vastly.
Maybe one day somebody will be leaving a letter on your doorstep telling you what their future intentions are for your area.
Yeah, exactly.
What advice would you have to give to somebody who is dreaming of starting a ranch or a rural business and they don't know where to begin? What's your advice for them?
I would say find somebody that's doing what you want to do and ask lots of questions. That's the first place I would look. There's also lots of great resources. The economic development councils in your communities are the best place to start, because that's their job, is to help people start businesses. And there's some ins and outs that you definitely need to know so that you are legal and no one comes knocking on your doorstep.
For sure. Looking back, is there anything that you would have changed in starting your business?
Not that no, because I've changed. I mean, I really haven't changed a lot, but I definitely didn't go in it whole hog and lose anything. I was very thoughtful when I was going, and thought about what I was going to do and what the next step was going to be and how to do it. Maybe learning a little bit more about goats before I got into goats. But
says every goat person ever.
uh-huh.
What is something that you are incredibly proud of your business and what you've brought to your community?
I think just being able to start a ranch from scratch without inheriting it is pretty awesome. It's not a super big ranch by any means, but to be able to get something started, because even though I'm a sixth generation, really technically we're first generation. We have created everything that we have. So
that is something to be incredibly proud of, especially in 2025.
It is. And in California, with California prices for real estate too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Kay, my last question that I like to ask everyone is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
Being a part of our community, and just that everybody's supportive of each other and helpful, and that you have something that you have created and you can be proud of.
Absolutely. Very good. Kay, thank you so much for sharing your story with me today and with us today. For folks who would like to connect with you online, where can they find you?
I have a Instagram and Facebook page. Isbell Mountain Acres is the handle.
Perfect. And I will list that and your website in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer, and a special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon.